Hey everybody, so in this video I wanted to talk about how to study for the MCAT on a budget. And really what I want to focus on here is what are the resources that you need for the MCAT, kind of in order of how you need them, and how can you save money on those resources. So we all know that the MCAT can be really expensive, and more generally the process of training to become a doctor, the undergrad, the medical school, residency, all of that can be very expensive and is often out of reach for people who don't have the kind of financial resources or financial support from family. And I find that pretty unfair. And so one of my goals, or one of the things that I care a lot about, is really how to make this process more fair for people who don't have those resources. So really, I'm going to go through this list of resources and explain to you, first of all, how necessary it is, and second of all, how you can minimize the amount of money that you spend on it. So the most important resource that I think you have to have, that really there's no alternative to it, is the AAMC's online prep bundle. So AAMC online prep. Now, I've spoken about this bundle before. This is a bundle of a whole bunch of practice exams and section bank questions and the kind of subject banks, right? And the reason why this bank is so essential, and I won't go into too much detail here because I've gone into it in other things, is that these questions are actually written by the same people who write the former MCAT exams, or the MCAT exams. A lot of them are former MCAT questions. And so these questions are going to be by far your best resource for studying for the MCAT. So when you look at the price of this bundle, right now it's selling for $310.25, which is actually an increase from last year where it was closer to $270. And this is a lot of money. And really, I don't think there's an alternative to having this bundle, but the MCAT does offer, the AAMC does offer a fee assistance program. So if you are low income, you can fill out this fee assistance program application, and if you get approved, you get access to that bundle for free. So I would strongly recommend, if you think you might qualify for this, I would strongly recommend you apply for it, because it gets you A, access to the bundle for free, B, it gets you half off the cost of the MCAT registration itself, which is not that cheap. And then finally, it gets you a waiver for a bunch of the fees when you're applying. The fee assistance only lasts a year. So if you take your MCAT and then you apply to the medical school after a year, you're going to have to do it again. You're going to have to fill out the application again. But I think it's still an excellent thing to do. And again, it gets you access to this absolutely essential resource. So if you look at like the family size with the poverty guidelines, you see it's fairly generous, I think. It does say also that if you're under the age of 26 at the time of submission, right? If you're under the age of 26 at the time of submission, then you do have to put your parents' information, and that can be a little bit difficult to get. So this application is not that easy. It does take a little bit of time, but I think it's absolutely worth it for MCAT and for the applications in general if you think you might qualify. So I would recommend trying to get it for free. Now, the number 2 resource. And this is more of like a category of resource or a class of resources. The number 2 category of resources is content review. So within this category, you've got the MCAT textbooks. So for example, Kaplan and Princeton Review make some pretty solid textbooks that are MCAT specific. And so when you're studying for the MCAT, you can of course use your pre-med textbooks to kind of study to review materials in general, but I wouldn't recommend you really follow them too closely, because they're going to go into typically more depth than you need to know for the MCAT. So I'd recommend you try and get MCAT textbooks. And now these can be expensive if you buy them new, and I wouldn't recommend you buy them new. I would recommend, there are a couple ways that you can get them for very cheap and or for free. So first of all, of course, you can get them used. And the companies will typically update their textbooks every year, trying to encourage you to buy the latest version and to really discourage you from borrowing them from somebody else. But realistically, I think that you can honestly go back to textbooks from like 2015 when the MCAT was updated. So as long as they're the version of the MCAT that was updated, I think you're pretty much good. The updates are usually pretty minor, like typo things and stuff. So not really, it's really not necessary to have a new version. And you can find them used, I would say, on eBay, maybe Amazon, but I think Amazon these days is not that ideal for used books. And especially if you can find them on, say, something like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, or maybe your local university's buying and selling Facebook groups or something to that effect. You can get these textbooks pretty cheap. If you know somebody, like a friend or a classmate who's taken the MCAT recently, ask them if they've got these books. They might even be able to give them to you for free. I remember when I took my MCAT, I gave away my textbooks for free to a friend. So I would recommend you get these textbooks, but you can get them like very, very cheap and or for free. And the other thing you can also do, by the way, is you can get them from the library. So lots of libraries will have these textbooks and you can check them out. Of course, the downside is, you can't keep them for that long, potentially, depending on, your library's policy, but still, a great option if you're not able to find these textbooks. The other option for content review, of course, is something like Khan Academy. And Khan Academy's MCAT prep page is free, of course. So it's a pretty great resource. I'd recommend you take a look at that. I've spoken previously in past videos about, my views on the Khan Academy playlist, namely that I think that they're really, really solid explanations, but they go into a little bit too much depth on things that are very, very low yield. And so again, I use them. I recommend you use them more as a reference material rather than necessarily I have to learn everything in these playlists, right? Instead of doing that, when you get a question wrong, you can use these types of playlists to review that particular concept that you got wrong. And finally, something like my ACE MCAT courses. And I won't go into too much depth about them here, but you can obviously take a look at my channel or the website. If you're on a budget and you can't afford them, just shoot me an email. Let me know what you're able to pay, and I can get them to you for very, very cheap. So number 2 is content review. Number 3 are additional practice questions and practice tests. So I'll just say additional practice. Now, within this category, of course, you start to get to a lot of these companies' content, especially something like UWorld. And my somewhat controversial opinion is that these are not required. These are not absolutely essential for the MCAT. That the only resources that are absolutely essential are the AAMC's online prep, and then something for content review, which there are lots of free or very, very cheap options these days, as I've just said. And the reason I say that is that the AAMC's online bundle has so many different practice questions and practice tests that I think that if you spend your time going through those practice questions and tests, and then once you've gone through them, then you can go back and actually go through them again. I think that that's a better use of your time than trying to go through third-party materials, like other companies' materials, like Kaplan or UWorld, because I think a lot of students spend way too much time going through questions specifically, and they don't review their questions properly. They kind of just go through them way too quickly. And so my next video, or my next strategies video, is going to be on how to go through practice tests and practice questions, how to review them. Because again, I don't think people are taking full advantage of the AAMC's practice materials, but it can help certainly to have additional practice questions. And so within that, you get to UWorld, and this is where the materials start to get very expensive. You can potentially maybe share UWorld accounts. I don't know if that's against their official policy, but I know that some people have done that. But it is a difficult resource to access for sure, and it's very expensive. And that's partly why I say I don't think it's 100% necessary. I think for the price that you're paying, it may not be the most useful resource. And the other thing about additional practice tests and questions is that there are lots of the test prep companies offer now a free practice test and some free practice questions. And I would recommend you take advantage of that. Go to their website. They're not going to advertise that super openly because of course they want you to pay for their stuff. But companies like Kaplan, for example, have a free practice test. And I would recommend you take advantage of those resources before you start paying lots of money for practice, third-party practice materials. And I've talked about this in other videos, but I wouldn't recommend you don't pay too much attention to those third-party practice materials. They're not necessarily accurate in the level, what you need to know, but they can be, helpful to practice. Now, number 4 for resources are tutors. So this is again where my controversial take with tutors is that tutors can be helpful, but they can also be not so helpful. And tutors can be, of course, very, very expensive. And so a lot of people sort of think that there's no way to score well on the MCAT unless you get a tutor. And again, I don't think that that's true. As somebody who's tutored students in the past, I will say that I think that the best use of a tutor, especially if you're on a budget, or let's say if you're not on a budget, you could, for example, go to a tutor and be like, hey, I want to take the MCAT. Can you help me? Right. And so then you're going to sit down with the tutor. They're going to set up a schedule for you. They're going to kind of walk you through everything. But that's a very, very expensive way to use a tutor, right? You're basically asking the tutor to hold your hand from the beginning to the end. And that means you're going to end up spending lots and lots of hours with the tutor and spending lots of money, right? And I really don't think that's the best use of your time or your money in particular, especially if you're on a budget. And so if you're on a budget and if you can't afford to pay for like many hours of tutoring, of one-on-one tutoring, what I would recommend is use a tutor kind of as a last resort. Or you should have studied, you should have taken a number of practice exams, and you should know exactly what you want out of the tutor. So for example, let's say you've been taking a number of practice tests and you're like pretty deep in your studying and you're noticing that you're having trouble with cars. And so what you might want to do is you might want to find a tutor to walk you through how they do cars, or walk you through or to sort of like critique your reasoning for cars, or maybe help you kind of walk through difficult questions on the MCAT, or to take a certain practice, maybe question bank or something to that effect. Again, as a former tutor, I will say that I really appreciated when students came to me knowing exactly what they wanted, knowing exactly how much time they wanted to spend, to get out of that. And so again, this I think is the best use of tutors, especially if you're on a budget. And I don't think you necessarily need a tutor, but if you do, you can pay for maybe a couple hours of tutoring and then see if it helps. The final resource that you might want to use are full courses. And again, this sort of gets to my point, which is that I don't think that these full courses are very necessary. And in some cases, I don't think they're necessary at all. So we've all seen that some, certain companies offer these types of, full either in-person or online courses that are several thousands of dollars. Now, the value of that type of thing is that it gives you structure and accountability. So if you're somebody who sort of like has a hard time, learning, or a hard time sort of developing that kind of structure for yourself, to sit down and study, to take practice tests, to spend hours working on this material, that's kind of where a course may come in handy. But that's a lot of money to be paying for structure and accountability, and it's really not necessary. So what I recommend is, if for the structure and accountability, find a study buddy or find a small study group and meet, say, once a week to briefly discuss your progress. Make sure to set like a timer, or like a schedule for how long you plan to meet. If these people are your friends, then of course you might end up spending a long time. But it's fine it's good. It's nice to have that kind of support while you're studying for your MCAT, to sort of to commiserate about, this sucks, and I hate this sort of thing. It's just kind of fun, right? Make sure it doesn't take up too much of your time, but it can help with accountability. So you can meet and be like, okay, here are my goals for this week. Here's what I'm planning to do. I wasn't able to fully meet my goal, but I got, somewhat of the way through it. Right. So I would strongly recommend you set up this type of a study group. And of course, that's typically, it's going to be free, right? It's going to be a much better deal than trying to get structure and accountability for thousands of dollars from a course, particularly because, these companies' courses, they're not necessarily going to be personalized, right? And so, I've talked to a lot of people who've taken these types of courses and really have not found them to be particularly beneficial. So again, and that's why I say that the biggest benefit out of it is the structure and the accountability. And you can get that, again, from a study buddy or a study group. By the way, just to go back to number 4, if another good use of a tutor potentially is to help you set up a study schedule. So you might want to meet with a tutor for an hour and be like, hey, I'm looking to take the MCAT. Can you give me kind of a study schedule for me to follow, right? And a number of these, you can find these online as well. I've actually been meaning to put up kind of a sample study schedule online myself. But the point is, again, you don't need to pay thousands of dollars to get a course, to get a study schedule. You can find lots of those samples online, and you can pay for maybe an hour of a tutor's time if you need, a personalized study schedule. So my overall point here is that while you could spend lots and lots and lots of money studying for the MCAT, you really don't need to. It's not essential for you to do well on the MCAT. Plenty of people do well on the MCAT without that. I myself did not pay for any tutors. I didn't pay for any full courses. I think I did pay for the Kaplan additional practice courses, which or their practice tests, which in hindsight I kind of regret doing. And actually, I paid for their books, and that got me their additional practice. And then, of course, I paid for the online prep, or I got the fee waiver for that. So this is going to be the best use of your money. Again, in order, the only thing that you absolutely have to get access to is the AAMC online prep. You should find something for content review, whether that's free resources online, or trying to pay a relatively small amount for content review materials. There are some free practice materials online. If you do need to pay for UWorld, that might be the other big expense you're going to have to pay for. And then finally, with tutors, maybe a couple hours of tutoring maximum. Even that is not 100% necessary, but can help if you know exactly what you want. And then finally, full courses, which I generally would not recommend, I think are generally a very poor use of your money. So if you have any questions about my recommendations here, please keep in mind they're just my recommendations. They're just one person's suggestions. Having talked to people, having worked with students for a while, these are kind of my opinions. Other people are going to have different opinions. So don't necessarily take this, obviously, as sort of gospel. Just take it as my suggestions. Any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. Always happy to answer students' questions about this type of process. And let me know if you disagree with these recommendations or if you have any, thoughts about them. Again, leave those in the comments. And thank you for watching.